I think more than 10, 15 years ago, so I met in Stockholm. And then he, you see, mentioned to me, when people develop the anger, that the object which that person feel angry appears something very negative. But the reality, 90% of that negativeness is mental projection, not reality. So his sort of finding, after I think a few decades, you see, he sort of helping people who have some disturbances in their mind, mainly too much stress and anger, like that. So his statement, the 2,000 years ago, Nagarjuna, exactly, you see, state the same way. So the very purpose of sort of analytical, we call analytical meditation, what is the reality, is counterforce about that. Anger, all these destructive emotion, very much based on independent appearances. So one kind of very subtle level of ignorance, consider these true. There's something, negative thing, independent, absolute there. So actually not. So even that scientists say 90% is a mental projection. So that causing anger. So they're trying to know the reality, nothing that kind of independent thing. That automatically reduce the grasping of that sort of object. Otherwise, you see, the concept of shunyata, just a mere scholars kazota, correct?
Basis of discussion.
The 용도가 지금 개발자야 mental 시야주는 즉 가서 지금 대외로 thesis mental 시야주는 인지 개발자야지.
So it is not just for displaying your expertise, because sometimes it happens with the so-called scholars that everybody wants to speak slightly different and make a display of what they know.
True, very true. Very true.
Guruji. Historically, ancient Indian philosophers, the scholars, is actually our teacher, our guru. We are Chela. So sometimes I sort of half joke, half sort of true, because we are not only disciple or Chela of Indian guru, but also quite a reliable Chela. Because in Guru's own land, a lot of ups and downs, and these Indian knowledge much damaged, much neglected. During those over 1,000 years, we as your Chela kept these knowledge intact, right? So we have some sufficient reason to discover ourselves a reliable Chela.
Well, I would like to say that one of the great treasures of India is the vast number of manuscripts that remain. And according to various estimates, they range between 5 million and 30 million, many of which have never been translated, and many of which are not even known. So they lie in innumerable private collections and libraries, in temples, in all sorts of places. And therefore, there is a great need for Indian scholars of Sanskrit, Prakrit languages, and others to translate and make them available, but in a way that is also scientifically meaningful. And that has been the great challenge, because Sanskritists who came from the West were generally not trained in science, and many of the Indian translators were also not professional scientists. Therefore, there was a real gap which should be bridged, because that is the key to making a lot of this knowledge relevant today and applicable. And therefore, that's where Professor Rama Subramaniam from IIT Mumbai is doing very important work in the field of history of mathematics in India. Professor Rama Subramaniam.
Thank you. Namaste. Just now, His Holiness was mentioning Guruji, etc. In fact, normally we use the term Jagat Guru to refer to people who have been guiding large sections of population. In that sense, so he is also in some sense Jagat Guru. But the word Jagat Guru can also be understood in a slightly different way. Sanskrit has different kinds of compounds. So the way you can derive meaning from a compound word depends on how you try to derive the compound. So this Jagat Guru has basically two terms, Jagat and Guru. So if you make a compound using what is known as Tatpurusha way of compounding the word, then it means the one who is the preceptor for the world. Okay, this is Jagataha Guruhu, Jagat Guruhu. The other way you can derive is the one who has a vision to see the entire world as his own Guru. Jagat Guruhu Yasya Saha. You understand? So the one who has developed the vision to see that
Tunda Tangoti da Jigdengi Lama Slaving, Jigden Suduta Mikala Kanzam Jewaje, Tig, Lama the Lobe Embassy. That Tunda Niva de Laving, Jigden de Koran, the Kanza Suzuki, the Lamai, Ibesoruch.
Oh, Shajadi.
Larry Shajat.
Alam Richa.
Larry.
Shajadi Jaji on the
Larry.
So the vision that you have, that you can learn from everything in the world. So if the one who has, he should be called as a Jagat Guru. So it is in this sense I take that. So it is a compliment to him rather than to me. Now, morning, the first session, we had an idea of how the mathematical tradition was distinct from the tradition which was developed elsewhere, and the kind of potential that it has in trying to communicate something much more easier than it is done elsewhere. So this is the kind of thing which was covered by Professor Raju. Then of course we had another session on biology. Now I thought I'll just take you to a different domain which we call as astronomy. One thing which we find here in the Indian astronomical tradition, which is quite distinct from the approach of the rest, at least in the ancient times, has been, here we have not imposed certain constraints on the model, rather we left the model open. So this is a very important distinction which one has to keep in mind, keeping the purpose of the science in mind. So you don't lay any emphasis on the model. If you actually impose constraint on the model, then you will be landing into various troubles. So this is one thing which I would like to bring out incidentally as we progress. I am bringing this important concept because this actually also throws light on the philosophical system that we have adopted here, the approach, the philosophy of science. The understanding that clearly emerges here and which has been explicitly stated in innumerable number of places in the Indian astronomical works is that models need not have anything to do with the reality. As long as they can help you in arriving at something which is of interest to you, any model that you develop, it should be considered as a valid model. I mean, the validity need not have to do anything with the reality. So this is another important distinction. So this is something which we will see both in philosophical tradition as well as in the scientific tradition. So this is another interesting thing that one has to do, one will notice when looking at the Indian astronomical tradition. The term that we use to refer to the science of astronomy is Jyotish Shastra. This word Jyotish Shastra is generally taken to refer to the science of astrology, but it has a much broader connotation. In fact, if you look at the derivation of this word, it has again two components, Jyotihi Shastra. Shastra is a systematic study. A systematic study of any particular discipline is called Shastra. You can call Mimamsa Shastra, Vedanta Shastra, Vyakarana Shastra, and so on. Similarly, here the word Jyotish Shastra refers to a systematic study of the celestial objects, or rather illuminating objects. Jyotihi is basically an illuminating object. A study of the motion of illuminating objects, etc., is called Jyotish Shastra. And this Jyotish Shastra has been one of the most ancient disciplines, and in fact it is accepted that this is perhaps the most ancient science, so which got developed for various reasons. And if we look at in the Indian tradition, so this has been referred to as one of the Vedangas. So after 4 Vedas, there is a saying in Mundaka Upanishad, when he tries to classify the branches of knowledge into 2 categories, he calls one as Paravidya, the other as Aparavidya. So Paravidya is something which helps us in trying to understand the nature of self and how you place this self among various other beings in the world. And Aparavidya is something which you have to deal with in order to deal with the world. So this Aparavidya constitutes Vedangas. So Siksha, Vyakaranam, Kalpo, Niruktam, Jyotisham, so Chandaha. So all of them are Aparavidyas. So here is where this Jyotish Shastra comes in, and it has been referred to in these Upanishads. Here I am just bringing this for the simple reason that this is one of the most ancient sciences, and regarding the antiquity of this science and the sophistication that has been arrived at in this particular, His Holiness was mentioning, so there are 3 civilizations which we know of, Egyptian, Chinese and Indian, most ancient civilizations, and the contributions made by the Indians, to my knowledge, seems to be something far superior is what you are trying to hint. And this is something which one can very clearly demonstrate with respect to the Indian astronomical tradition. So here, there has been a lot of debate which has been going on among scholars. Some view that this, some of you are familiar with the large span of time that we have in our tradition. Even Buddhist, I think we have this Kala Chakra, so which has not been sort of quite well studied. So these Buddhists have a calendrical system which has to, which has one of the important texts which is called Kala Chakra. And here this Kala Chakra, when we talk about, so this chakra has to do with sort of cycle, and we speak of very short cycles starting with a day. So we can think of a week, we can think of a month, we can think of a year, and then we can move on. And then they have come up with a certain unit which is called a Mahayuga, which is 43,20,000 years. And 43,20,000 years, this duration is taken to be 43,20,000 years. And 1,000 times that is considered to be a kalpa, etc. Now, the point I want to make is, so this kind of large spans which they have thought about has some basis. And how long have we been practicing this science? There is a huge debate. So some people say that everything has been borrowed here from other sciences, Babylonian, Greek, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, there are a few scholars who have very clearly stated that this tradition is something which is extremely old, and it is this tradition. In fact, Professor Raju was trying to tell in the morning that calculus has been transmitted from here to Europe. Now, there are scholars who believe that the science of astronomy has moved from India to Greece. And there are many scholars who say that it has to be the other way around, kind of a thing. But there is a very interesting discussion which has been presented. I just want to draw two important people here. So there is a very interesting paper which has been written by John Playfair. This Playfair wrote his paper, I think, in 1798. So he was professor at the University of Edinburgh, a Scottish mathematician and scientist. So here he says, so this is something which is extremely important, and in connection with, and this paper is actually titled The Astronomy of the Brahmins. So in order to make a distinction between the way it was practiced elsewhere and the way it was practiced here, so he calls it so. Everyone, I believe, will acknowledge that no greater service could be rendered to the learned world than to rescue this precious fragment from obscurity. What he means by the precious fragment is the body of knowledge which was prevalent here in this particular Indian civilization, which has its broad spectrum influences elsewhere too. So that's what he is trying to say. And this should actually be a delight to the progress of the mankind itself. And as far as this Shastra is concerned, so this is something which has to be understood as Pratyaksha Shastra. So you can think of various other disciplines which has to do with Shabda Pramana, Agama Pramana also. But here, it is not that you dismiss Agama Pramana, and if you dismiss Agama Pramana, you will not be a scientist at all. After all scientists have to see the data which has been presented earlier, and then whether it correlates, if it does not correlate, what is the difference, and so on. We have to build upon it. Here, this has to be there, but if there is a discrepancy between what you observe and what has been transmitted through Agama, then you have to completely discard that, and then Pratyaksha has to be considered as the most important pramana as far as this sign is. That's why he is saying, Shruti smrtyoho punar bhede yacha smritihi pratyaksha aviruddha sa parigrihyate. In fact, he was talking about Pratyaksha. So today morning, so this Pratyaksha pramana is something which can never be considered inferior to any other pramana. So this is something which is extremely important. So this Pratyaksha is something which is the most important, and here this Pratyaksha Pramana has been enabling people to precisely fix the planetary positions as seen by us and record it. See, so you just see so where the sun is, where the moon is, etc. So our Kala, the notion of Kala, so this again I want to lay straight away here. See, the importance of this Jyotish Shastra lies in predicting times. See, Kala is something which is, in fact, what is time? See, then Professor Raju said I have written 2 books on time. See, you can write 20 books, but this question is something which is really a puzzling question. Okay? So this time, so in fact somebody said, when I asked this question as a student who entered into postgraduate. So I asked, what is this time? What is time? So then the professor immediately said, if you ask me what is the time, I will tell you. But if you ask me what is time, I cannot answer.
Augustine. It's Augustine.
So anyway, so the point is, so this, as far as Indian tradition is concerned, this is something which we have to keep in mind. The purpose of Jyotish Shastra is Kala Nirnaya. It's a very, very simple definition. So Kala, you can think of something which is in the most abstract sense. Kala, you can think of something which we keep track of in order to perform various events. So this is something which we have to keep in mind. So this Kala is something which is determined by us based on the motions which are happening around us. So Kala is not something which is very abstract as defined in Jyotish Shastra. Kala is something which is determined by the motion of objects around you. Which are the objects which contribute to this Kala? Primarily sun and moon. So these are the two objects which are timekeeping objects for us. So if we conceive of the various periods that we have, so starting from day, so to year, to month, etc., all of them have to do, tithi which we use, so all of them have to do with the motion of the sun and the moon around us. So if we are able to capture their motion through our mathematics, so then we will be able to predict so what will happen, when will happen, and keep track of time. So keeping track of time is the purpose of Jyotish Shastra, and in fact the very term that is employed to refer to Jyotish Shastra is Kala Vidhana Shastram. So it is not something for us to discover this cosmology or say that this is how the cosmos has to behave, but this purpose of Jyotish Shastra is Kala Vidhanam. In fact, it is slightly extended. When you say Kala, so sometimes the sun will rise by 5:30, sometimes the sun will rise by 5 o'clock. So depending on where you are, right? So whether you are close to equator or far away from equator. So Desha also comes into picture. So Desha can be determined, Kala can be determined, Dik also can be determined. Dik Desha Kala Nirnaya is the purpose of Jyotish Shastra. It's a very, very simple definition with which we proceed in the Jyotish Shastra, not making big claims. Okay? So it is a very, very practical science in that sense. So Dik Desha Kala Nirnaya. And in doing so, we have been showing exceptional skills, and that has to do with the kind of mathematics that sort of got developed. So the algorithms which got developed here, and the kind of care that people took to see to it that you will be able to predict as accurately as possible various astronomical events. So here, the study of John Playfair, so who very carefully studied a few tables which was passed on from this place to Europe. Okay, so this happened by the end of 17th century, when some of the tables which these Indian astronomers have been employing was transmitted there. When it was transmitted, I think it started by end of 17th century and went on for about almost a century. And there is a person called Bailey who wrote a book on Indian astronomy. And after that...
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
In the 16th century,
Yeah.
already there was a Jesuit college in
Yeah.
Cochin. If you look at its syllabus,
Yeah.
they were doing mass translation of Indian texts.
Correct.
On the Toledo model. So it started in the 16th century. That makes a very critical difference,
Yeah.
because Kepler, Tycho Brahe come in this 16th century.
See, that is a bit difficult for us to say, because the analysis as such of these tables so is only evident around that period.
No, Tychonic model is same as Neil Kant's model. Don't you agree?
No, I do agree, but the issue is to clearly establish the relation that it got from here to there, and then that is how they worked out, because they had their own ways of arriving at.
Tycho Brahe was astronomer royal to the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
It had to go to him. It had to go to Clavius. If you look at Clavius' trigonometric
It's
tables,
a bit difficult.
okay, please
anyway.
continue. Please continue.
Yeah. So the point that he is trying to make is, see, this is a very, very interesting observation which he makes. So one is, so he saw that every event was so nicely predicted, using these tables. And then he makes 3 hypotheses. It is a 58-page long paper. So a very beautiful analysis has been done by him. And he says, see, if every event is so nicely predicted using these tables, so then you cannot dismiss by saying, so this is all by chance we were able to predict it correctly. So this by chance hypothesis, so is gone. The second hypothesis is there must have been a Newton, okay, so who was able to present the theory behind it, and Lagrange who was able to analyze, and so on and so forth. But then that is also not possible according to him, because there was no Newton, or no analysis was done at that level. And therefore he says, this is the third point, is very interesting. Observations were made in India when all Europe was barbarous and uninhabited, and those blah 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 made in Europe 5,000 years afterwards come in mutual support. So this is the kind of conclusion that he draws after making thorough analysis, which means, so in our Indian astronomical tradition, we have what is known as Kali Yuga, so which is currently running. So in the Kali, see, it is basically, so which is this year? You will say 2016, right? This 2016, so is something based on a certain event. From then we start reckoning this, right? So similarly, we have a system in which, so it is 5116 or something like that now. So it started with 3102 BC. So that is taken to be the beginning of Kali Yuga. So now he is saying, based on the analysis that he does, he says that astronomers must have been making observations, so from that time, and that is what has been recorded, etc. So this is a very interesting observation, so which points to the fact that, so this tradition of making observations carefully goes back at least 5,000 years, okay, from now. And in fact, according to his computations, he says it should be even pushed by 1,000 years if we look into certain other things. Anyway, so this is incidental. So, but there are also people who keep saying, see, this is just to make a distinction. So in India, astronomers paid little attention either to observation or theory. Okay, so this is all quoted from paper. And then mathematical astronomy was introduced into India along with sciences of divination. So from celestial omens and of astrology from the West. Okay, so the derivation of their mathematical models, arithmetic or Babylonian, geometric from the Greeks, or the basic parameters from external sources, of course, explains the lack of concern with observational astronomy in India. If we accept observations played no role in India, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So this is another view which has been presented by certain historians. So there is a clear distinction between these two. And what is it that one has to choose? See, whether this view or that view. So it is something which has been confusing people. So as various things confuse, this also confuses. Whether you had a science of your own, or you simply borrowed and then pretended as if you had been practicing this science. Based on a variety of analysis, so finally he says, see, even with all the exception that has been stated, must still be ascribed some communication between the authors of them. The communication is more likely to have gone from India to Greece than the other way around. Anyway, so let us put this aside. Let us look into the source works. What do they say? So this is something which I am quoting from a work of Jeshtadeva, which is in sort of Manipravalam. So he says, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of this is to do Kala Nirnaya. And there is a very clear understanding that these motions that are happening in the heavens are not something which are going to be stationary forever. Or rather, so it is not something which is going to be happening at the same speed at all points of time. So this is something which is extremely important as a scientist. And so this makes a lot of distinction between the way West looked at it and the way we have been looking at it right from the beginning. So he says, Pandulla Ganitajnyanmar Chonnadottu Parannidam. So this is basically in Malayalam. So what he says is, in the red one, Ottu Vannilla Marilla Grahanadigalum Unnume. See, what he is trying to say is, so when Aryabhata wrote his treatise on astronomy, what made him write the treatise? So, and give parameters which are slightly different from, or any other text if you look at. So, when they sort of revise, what makes them revise? It is because Onnu Vandilla means you make some prediction and the prediction is not in concordance with the observation. The moment you have this, then you have to revise. As simple as that. So, there is nothing which is so sacred about a particular number which you try to assign to a particular thing. So, this is something which has to be kept in mind. And on the other hand, in this background, if you just see the statement that they were not making observation, etc. So, what is the purpose of saying all this? So, this is something which has to be very clearly understood, that this is a Pratyaksha Shastra and all the parameters that have been handed down to you has to be taken as something which will give you some direction to look into and not something which is going to be fixed forever. And this is something which has been very clearly said in the last line. If you look at, see, Iniyum Kandukollenum. So he speaks of various revisions that took place at various points of time. And finally, the statement that he makes is, Iniyum Kandukollenum Cherakalad Varunnadu. Means you have to keep on observing at a later points of time to see if there is some change in this. So we know today that things are going to be only described by a time series and not something which is fixed. So this is something which they seem to have sort of incorporated in their own understanding of the science of astronomy. And when they speak of what is Kala, there is an interesting question, and how do you determine them? So this Aryabhatiya, there are 4 chapters. The first chapter is called Geetika Pada, then we have Kalakriya Pada, then we have Ganita Pada, Kalakriya Pada and Gola Pada. So in Kalakriya Pada, so the commentator Bhaskara actually asked this question, what is meant by Kalakriya Pada? There is a beautiful analysis. He says, Atra kah kalaha kava kriya. Kah kalaha kava kriya. You call it Kalakriya Pada. Ganita Pada, you understand that which has to do with mathematics. So Kalakriya Pada, what do you understand by this? So here he says, Atra kechid vadanti kriya vyatiriktah kalaha aparecha kriya eva kalaha. See, so kriya vyatiriktah kalaha. See, this is whenever one speaks of time. So in fact, morning he was referring to Khandana Khanda Khadyaka. So there is a chapter called Vartamanatvadi Khandanam. So His Holiness was also asking, so what is time? So when you say what is present time, what is past time? So when you say that the present, so how do you say this is present? So it has to do with some action. Only with reference to some action can you think of present or past. So action is invariably associated in trying to define what is present, future, etc. So yesterday when I arrived here, I will say tomorrow the meeting is going to happen. So this notion of tomorrow, so is associated with a certain event, or rather event is associated with tomorrow. So yesterday that event happened. Now you are associating the same event with yesterday, the event is happening now. So the meeting is going on now, right? So this associating now with the meeting and I associate meeting with tomorrow, yesterday, and when I go back to Mumbai, I will associate this moment, this event with yesterday, right? So this Kriya is something which is enabling me. It is only with respect to Kriya that one can speak of Kala. So otherwise, without Kriya, there is no question of Kala. So that is why he is asking, Kriya Vyatiriktah Kalaha? Can you actually separate out Kriya and then define Kala? Which is going to be impossible. And when you associate a Kala with a Kriya, then are you going to associate with present or past or future? So all of them will be trashed out by this Khandanakara Harsha. Anyway, so that is what he is hinting now. Whether Kriya Vyatiriktah Kalaha, Aparetu Kriya eva Kalaha. Therefore, since you cannot separate out Kriya and Kala, so they say Kriya and Kala are not different. Anyway, so then he says Kriya Vyatiriktah Kalostu Kriyava Astu. Doesn't matter to me. As far as my thing is concerned, so what is Kala? Surya Chandramasoho yaha paro viprakarshaha saha ardhamasaha yaschatayoho sannikarshaha saha masaha evam dwadasha masaha samvatsaraha ityadi. So let us not worry about the philosophical notion of time. So let us set it aside. So the notion of time that we keep currently has to do with the motion of sun and the moon. Okay? So if the moon is in conjunction with sun, so then it is Samavasya. The moon moves faster and then once again comes back again in conjunction with the sun. Then I say 1 month is over. Finished. In between I will say 30 divisions, 30 tithis are over. So as far as time is concerned, so the kind of time that I am dealing with has to do with the motion of the sun and the moon. So this is Kriya. This is the Kriya with which Kala is defined. So all our Kriyas in quartz watch, etc. have to be trashed if the spin of the earth changes. But if you define your motion with respect to these objects, so then it is going to be same. See, even if the spin of the earth slightly changes, so it doesn't matter. Or the speed of the moon changes, then also you can keep this definition of month. Okay. Anyway, so that is something which is different. So here he is saying, Evam Dwadasha Masaha Samvatsaraha, this is what is Kala. Now, what do you mean by Kala Kriya? Kriya here means Vyapara. Okay. So, Vyapara is a certain exercise that you do.
A small question.
Yeah.
Day and night.
Yes.
How happened?
Day and night, see, this has to do with the exposure of the sun's rays on the sphere. This, when we say, when the sun's light is seen by you, you call it day. When the sun sort of sets, you call it night. Why does this happen? There are two explanations. In fact, this itself is an interesting question. I asked students.
So, according ancient Indian
Correct.
mythology.
Yeah. In Indian astronomical tradition, yes.
So, world flat or round?
Earth is round. Absolutely. Earth is round. There is no question of it. See, it's very simple. I'll tell you. That I in fact asked students, so Earth is round, how do you know? Earth is spinning, how do you know?
Then, the 5th century.
Yeah. No. This is something.
I heard,
Yeah.
Someone told me,
Yeah.
it's in the 5th century.
Yes.
One Nalanda master,
Yeah.
which is described,
He is called Aryabhata.
oh, the world is round,
Yeah.
not flat.
Yeah.
So some people
Yeah.
reject that.
Yeah. No. Nobody rejected that Earth is round. I'll tell you.
1 minute.
Yeah.
It is not true that nobody rejected. In the
No.
Puran,
No.
in the Puran,
Let me tell you.
in the Puran, you have
Talking about India.
Puran is in India, and if you see Lalla's Shishadi Vriddhid, there he has a whole chapter which is refutation of mythical notions, and he says, and this is not just there in Lalla, it is there in a whole series of Vateshwar and so on. There's a whole series of followers of Aryabhat. So they are refuting the idea that the earth is flat, which is found in some Purans. And they are saying that you can see that the distant horizon is, you cannot see objects which are across the horizon. So especially if you are in the sea, you see a ship coming from a distance, it becomes visible at about 16 miles, something like that. And with that, you can measure the size of the earth. And my students, I used to take them to measure the size of the earth like that. So there were some people, but there is a very strong, among astronomers, there is nobody who rejects the earth being round. Among astronomers, all astronomers will accept. But there is a popular tradition where various things are believed. And that tradition is refuted by
No. What is,
순수소숨 과열해.
pardon?
In cosmology.
Trivishtapa.
Yeah. Where is it? Where is it?
No. See,
The location.
Meru is not pole.
no.
Meru is not pole.
Some scripture,
No. See, let me tell you.
like Abhidhamma
What is, Professor Raju, what he was trying to point out is this notion of earth being flat or round is something which is so easily dismissible that it cannot be flat. See that eclipses that you have. So if the earth were to be, so they had a very clear understanding of what eclipse is. In this connection, some people believed that something swallows something, Rahu, Ketu, etc.
That's right.
So these are all completely dismissed, and I mean maybe I can even show you. See that the thing is, this eclipse very clearly demonstrates that earth has to be round.
Right.
Yeah. So there is no question of, and
not
of
the
course, in the
eclipse.
terrestrial
They-
phenomena, the boat going,
Yes.
so you see that. So there
That
are various things. But this is something which could not be settled in India. When you were referring to this Nalanda astronomer Aryabhata, so this Aryabhata has actually proposed to two things. This day and night you were asking, no? This day and night, why is it happening? Is it happening because of the spin of the earth, or is it happening because of the entire cosmos going around you?
그래서
So there are two things. There are two ways, right? So in 24 hours,
galaxies do so. Yes.
in 24 hours, the entire celestial sphere can go around you, or the simple model will be you rotate, keep that stationary. Aryabhata has proposed two verses in his Golapada. He says, Anuloma gatir nausthaha pashyatyachalam vilomagam yadvat achalani bhani tadvat samapaschimagani lankayam. He gives a beautiful simile. As a person rowing in the boat towards the east, so would see the trees as if they are going towards the west. Though trees are stationary and he is moving, so the apparent motion of the trees as noticed by him is what is happening with respect to earth and the sphere. So which means earth is rotating, the celestial sphere is stationary, but you see as if the sun is rising, moon is rising and setting, etc. So this is the first verse which he says. But then the theory of rotation of earth so cannot be explained in those days very clearly. So because there were questions which were asked. So if earth were to be rotating, so then they can calculate the speed at which it has to rotate. If it rotates at such a terrific speed, then how the clouds can rain, etc. So the flags have to be pointing in one direction. There are various questions which were raised and they could not be handled.
Clothesline and falcon, these are the two examples raised by Varahamihir.
Yeah.
And these examples are also later found in the Almagest of Claudius Ptolemy. The
No, it cannot be later.
manuscript- It is
It will be earlier.
later. It is later because there is no Claudius Ptolemy, and the Almagest manuscript comes from after the Beit al-Hikmah of Baghdad. So it has accreted information from India.
Okay. Anyway, so there are various things.
자, 저 모티브 중날 타다라. 모티브 중날로리야. 아니. 아, 내가 뭐가 전에 셔번의 신기 링실링된다 르르션네. 진짜 생애시 여인나 매나.
In many of the non-Buddhist Indian treatises, is there an explanation of the process of the movement of the sun and the four continents?
Yes.
And the its
Of the
subcontinents.
continents.
And this,
There is.
Mount
Jambudvip
Meru,
and so on.
Mount Meru being in
Mount
the
Meru
center.
is described by Aryabhat. He says gods live on Mount Meru, and since it's on the North Pole, for them a day lasts for 6 months.
See,
So the demons live at the South Pole. So for them also they last.
가.
Me to the Mount Meru, the Lojos.
제 전부인데. 전부들 봐.
Nare,
어.
slowly taking yours.
어. Not Paul.
in all the Siddhanta texts, you will find a brief description.
링시디 민 가사. 렉자나. 샤르바보다 본 전부는 누 발란주디. 렉자살 가사.
Deha, Videha, all those, the four continents.
This description is not so much found in these astronomy texts because Aryabhat, for example, will not mention it or whatever. But as he says, there are other.
See, Vateshwara
other texts.
Siddhanta, Bhaskara. So there are so many Siddhantas which give detailed description in a chapter which is called Goladhyaya.
Because in the,
Yes, they all have
the
a
Buddhist
Goladhyaya.
text we have Deha, Videha, Godain.
In fact, they speak of 4 points which are 90 degrees off from a
No,
place
that's
called
different.
Ujjain.
That's
so these
different.
are all things. And then they speak of some Mount Meru, and then in this direction, all that they speak of.
They speak of Singapore, Singapura. That is one of the things. They speak of Yunnan, whatever it is, Anya or
Romaka.
Romak. They speak of Romak, and which is Alexandria. And then, of course, that Yunnan, then it comes, it is placed somewhere, one doesn't know where, but 90 degrees apart. So, you know what's physical location.
I would like to clarify very briefly that we have to be careful about not mixing up popular cultural traditions
Yeah.
with scientific
Yeah,
literature.
yeah, okay.
All civilizations have popular traditions. If
I
you go
agree.
to the United States now, you'll find that a very large proportion of people believe in biblical cosmology,
I agree.
and they do not believe in evolution. Now, that doesn't mean that the US does not know about evolution.
Fully agreed.
It is
Yeah.
just that we tend to mix mythology, which is a very vital part of popular culture,
Yeah.
with scientific developments. And we believe that if a country has a mythology, then it couldn't have good science.
That is precise.
I
That is a
think
that is one of the
I
problems.
think he is trying to arrive. Yeah. I'll just clarify what His Holiness is trying to say. He's trying to get a connection between this tradition and the Buddhist tradition. This is what he's trying to get because the calendar, Tibetan calendar, for example, doesn't have a full-fledged ontology, but the calendar works. So this kind of a problem arises, and this and the description, the geographical description that is seen, whether there is any counterpart. Am I right? Am I right? Is that what you are aiming at?
No, he is asking whether the few descriptions which are found in Buddhist texts are they found in Siddhantic?
My motivation,
Yeah.
my desire,
Yes.
I already rejected the some of the description of
okay.
Abhidhammakosha Karika.
Okay.
Correct.
Wrote by Bosubandhu.
Okay.
So I'm trying to seek more
See,
support.
Yeah.
Okay. So
In fact, let me just give you, so I'll skip because the time is up. See, there are these eclipses, so how they are nicely, this popular version which is there has been discarded in the Siddhantic version. See, Bhuchayam Swagrahane Bhaskara Markagrahane Pravishati Induhu. See, what is happening during a solar and lunar eclipse? In the case of Swagrahane, means in its own eclipse. So Bhuchaya is the shadow of the earth. The moon enters into the shadow of the earth. And it enters into Bhaskara. Bhaskaram Arkagrahane. Pravishati Induhu. Evam Uparaga Karanam. Uparaga is eclipse. Karana is cause for it. Uktam Divyadrigbhihi Acharyehi. So this is how the ancient masters have explained. Rahu Rakaranam Asmin. See. So Rahu is not responsible.
When I was very young
Yeah.
in Potala,
Yeah.
one night, you see, moon eclipse.
Eclipsed.
So then popular believe
Yeah. Rahu. Coming and
So at that time, I also, you see,
some animal which is.
noticed, you see the moon shaking. So out of fear,
Yeah.
so I pray, oh, that should survive.
In fact, this has been. No, this is there in every tradition. As he was trying to point out, Japanese used to do this, Chinese used to do this, Koreans used to do this. almost every place, so such kind of a thing has been there. Yeah.
Although Rahu is not responsible.
Ityukta shastra sadbhavaha. Okay. And in fact, there is very clear statement. Chadayati shashi suryam. Shashinam mahati cha bhutchaya. See, mahati cha bhutchaya. This is a diagram. Now, see, this is also nicely explained. Since you asked me about day and night, see.
Yes.
So this, see, nityam, in fact, they not only talk about the cause for day and night here, they speak about even why the moon is bright and how it decreases, etc. There, this is a very clear understanding. Nityam adhasthasya indoho bhumir bhanoho sitam bhavatyardham. In fact, they say one half of the moon is always brilliant. Okay? Nityam adhasthasya indoho bhabhihi. Bha means chaya. Bha, rays. Bhanoho bhabhihi means by the rays of the sun. Sitam bhavati ardham. Sitam means bright. Half of the moon is always bright. Swachhayaya anyatu asitam. Why is the other face dark? It is by its own shadow. See, one half of the moon is dark by its own shadow, and the other half of the moon is always lit by the sun. Okay? So this is very clearly stated even by Varaha Mihira. He was in the early 6th century. In fact, there is a much more stronger statement here for refuting that the eclipse cannot happen because of that. See, yadi kaya yutaha atha mandali bhavichari khachara shiro athava niyatam gati mudvahan kasam bhaganardhantarito grasati. See, if some demon were to attack, he can attack whenever he feels. How can you predict that? You will not be able to make any prediction if it were to be happen by.
He also have some timetable.
No. The point is, so we do not do things so systematically, and therefore it cannot.
The systematic demand.
See, asuro yadi maya yutaha niyataha atigrasati iti matam ganitena katham salabhyate. So how can he be captured by mathematics? Okay.
아니 되게 안다. 깨알바다 깨신식 로스타 샤스와. 제가 니모도 나와 장타 컨트리여 봐. 니모 나와 소스 가서 잡게 치중 차지 제디 중앙에 열배. 자, 저들 세우면은 안다. 저 자나 수샤디디 과콩으로 쥐고 있는 섬처럼.
Because we
아니
did,
로비니 코란게 다 숨어 있느니 골로는 베생에서 중샤. 대세 대되기 무디고 중나로 여배이나 다티 용자하게 다녀시다 또 숨셔 연구로 봐.
we did discuss about when we were talking about the time.
Uh-huh.
We discuss about the eon and the great eon and
Yeah.
so forth.
Yeah.
And so His Holiness wondering whether there is a detailed description about the distance between the sun and the moon and so forth.
Yeah.
Because his curiosity from Earth to sun.
Yeah.
to moon,
Lare.
distance,
Yeah.
and
There is.
also the size.
Yeah.
There is.
So
Because
every time you see mentioned you see certain sort of number.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, this we feel at that time, 딱 그전에 century 과래 인인 피도 가 4th, 5th century.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that time, the popular concept, flat world and Mount Meru. So according popular sort of words today, Kazoda believe or saying, he may sort of write using that, wrote this, that text. So if not sort of Kazoda.
so His Holiness wondering whether there is some other authentic sources in other Indian traditions
Okay.
About what?
about the distances.
Flat.
between
Yes,
the
yes.
sun,
There are.
moon.
Whole world flat.
Everybody measures the size of the earth. That's a very important parameter. And Bhaskar will say, Brahmagupt will say, if you don't know the size of the earth, it is futile to determine longitude. Vyartham deshantaram.
저도 로빈 인이기 박사 응주 찍다 째신 박사 찍은 거는 can't
It's an accurate measure.
No, size of the earth is one thing.
The problem is it is measured in yojan.
Yojan, yeah.
And now the yojan,
Correct.
we do not know exactly what it is.
가
Yojan.
박사 유진.
But we know that we are able to compare it. For example, Al-Biruni came to India and he gives an estimate for size using that same method in terms of Arabic meal. Now the correspondence of the Arabic meal with the English meal is very precise. And so therefore we know that this estimate was extremely precise for the size of the earth.
자상가 안다. 박사 응주 찍다 째서 니 아다 모티브 중들랑 콩여이나 메나서 보다.
So His Holiness is wondering whether this mention about the size of the earth and the distance, like in terms of yojana.
Yes, it's there
he
in
was
every
wondering
text.
if there is a
moon and the sun.
Lare,
Distance
only
of
50,
Lare,
sun 51.
51.
Moon 50.
So difference of only one yojana between the sun.
박사.
No, it's not a difference of one. I don't remember the figure.
No.
Yes.
Let me tell you. So this distances are specified in yojanas, but the measure of yojana specified by one astronomer will not be the same as the measure of yojana given by another astronomer.
알레 박사.
But they will
새
be
쇼다데 어떤 간주 비전 알레 두 멘다 신경스도.
but they will be internally consistent. Suppose you say that the Earth's diameter is so many yojanas. So you can say x. Another astronomer may say x plus n. But the specification which he gives between the Earth, Sun, Moon, Sun, etc., will accordingly vary in his own unit. So they will be internally consistent. And without knowing the distance between Earth and the Moon, you will not be able to predict eclipses. So that distance is something which you should know. But as far as the distance of Sun is concerned, so every tradition has failed by some measure, but the Moon has been very precisely measured. Okay, so this is one thing which I want to say. See, in most of the texts, you will find that I have presented this knowledge to you by some Devata Prasada. Okay, so Prasada of Ganesha, Prasada of Surya, Prasada of Navagraha, and so on. So what does one mean by that? And if something has been revealed to you by the God, then why should you revise the parameter? Because God himself has given. It should be perfect. So to this question, a very interesting answer has been presented by Nilakantha. He says, see, nanu tapobhihi prasanno brahma aryabhataya bhagana paridhyadikam grahana ganana sadhana bhutam sankhya vishesham upadidesha. See, pleased by the penance of Aryabhata, Brahma himself revealed the parameters to Aryabhata. If so, then tasya kutaf parikshanam. Why is it that you have to examine that? Brahmanaha sarvajñatvat. After all, God is omniscient. So he himself has revealed to you. It should be perfect all the time. So for that he says, Maivam. Manda means dullard. So please don't think like that. When we say by the grace of Brahma or Aditya, it doesn't mean that Brahma or Aditya comes in front of you and then dictates you the parameter. So Nanuta, he says, Devata Prasadaha Mati Vaimalya Hetureva. See, it only means that you have a very clear thinking. So you need grace for you to think clearly. So your intellect will become pure and thinking will be done nicely by you. This is all we mean by Devata Prasada. It is not something which is to be understood as Brahma or Sun coming in front of you and giving you the parameters. See, na punaha Brahma Adityo va swayam agatya upadishet. So this is something which we have to keep in mind, because many people have taken upon this particular aspect of the Jyotish Shastra, and then they will say, see, so you have to somehow introduce this divine revelation. Okay? So this person has been using this divine revelation to cheat the people, etc., etc. So this is all something which is nonsense. So this Devata Prasada is to be understood in this sense.
대외 디지털에 때문에 숭수로 신의 말을 붙이기 어렵다. 여러 사실 돼.
So what kind of calendrical system is followed by you?
그래서
Buddhist monks.
Kalachakra, Tibetan.
나 지금 돈 안 쓰면 나 오십니다. 나 시면
Huh?
His Holiness doesn't know.
Tibetan system is different from Buddhist system. Buddhist system was calendrical system was taken to China. All right, so the Tibetan system, there is a method of calculation, but there is no underlying ontology.
No, that's why I'm asking. So do they have some text?
Yeah,
with
yeah,
which
they
you-
have a text. I have the text with me.
Kala
but
Chakra.
I don't understand Kala
그렇지
Chakra.
넉시
Kalachakra.
넉시 뒤 자나네 팬저이 되지 그렇지 뒤 자가는 말ပဲ뒤 장수 신경 질럽다
Two types of astronomy that is prevalent
Uh-huh.
in Tibet. One is called almost like, literally speaking, it's like white kind of calculation which came from India, and then black kind of astronomy which came from China.
Okay.
Naxi, literally translating.
What do you call them?
둘로 철로 둘로
And
수지차네
this term white and black has been used because of the tradition of the cloth in these two countries.
갈라
That Indians
cloth.
primarily prefer wearing white cloth. Chinese
So here
primarily
also.
black cloth.
I'm Chinese.
sabhe rangi ji ngam shengshun da zhao yue de ji nam sha de pe man do kan
Okay.
I have only one text,
Ah.
the Kala Chakra.
Yeah, Kalachakra. In fact, nobody was able to decipher. So
No,
once
it
I
is-
went for a meeting in Sarnath, they wanted to study this Kalachakra, but I think the tradition has been lost, and we are not able
The
to.
text is there, but there is no ontology. There is no underlying astronomical model.
So only one important thing which I want to convey. So then I think I'll wind up. See here, what I'm displaying here is a very important statement which has been made by the 7th century astronomer who commented upon Aryabhatiya. Aryabhatiya is a very, very small text written in 100 verses, roughly. Okay? So this is to be understood only with commentary because it has been put in a very terse form. And one of the most elaborate commentaries that we have is one by Bhaskara, who was just 100 years later Aryabhata. Speaking about, see, when we conceive of the motion of sun and the moon, we have certain circles, this, that, etc., drawn various things in order to explain how to compute the actual position of the planet. So there is something called mean planet and there is something called true planet, they will say. So mean planet is something which moves with some mean velocity, and the actual planet is something which is slightly different from the mean planet. So the way you look at the draw. And here various theoretical tools have been employed, so called Mandocha, Shigrocha, etc., etc. So here what Bhaskara says is, all these things that have been described in connection with the computation of planetary position has nothing to do with the reality. So these are all certain theoretical tools which have been devised by you in order to arrive at the exact position of the planet. So this is something which is extremely important to understand from a theoretical perspective, because if you look at the other models, so there they say everything has to move with uniformly on some surface which is absolutely symmetrical and so on. So there are various constraints which have been imposed in the Greek tradition. But here it is very clear that, see, Ucha Nicha Madhyama Paridhihi. Paridhi means circles, various circles that you think of. Sputagati sadhanopayaha. Sputagati is actual motion. Sadhana upaya means the means by which you can get it. Upayanam naiva niyamoktihi. There is no constraint on the kind of model that you can arrive at. So the kevalantu upeya sadhakaha upayaha. This is a very important statement. It is like, suppose I want my computer to run this program. So this should be the output. So it doesn't matter whether you write in Java, whether you write in some other language, whether you write in something C++ and so on and so forth. As long as the output is something which is acceptable to me, so then it is fine with me. It doesn't matter what you use. I mean, it is in this sense. Upeya sadhakaha upayaha means are to be considered only this way. So they need not have anything to do with the reality. Tasmat, in fact, he categorically says, Iyam sarva prakriya asatya. See, all the tools that we have discussed here has nothing to do with the reality. Okay? Asatya means it is not true. Yaya grahanam sputagatihi sadhyate. In fact, he goes on to explain, Evancha paramartha jijnasubhihi. See, he was saying paramartha satya and samvriti satya. Okay, paramartha jijnasubhihi, those who want to understand that paramartha, asatyopayena satyam pratipadyate. See, by means which are not true, so the true is something which is being explained to you, is a general statement that he says. In fact, this is true, even Advaita Vedanta, this Gaudapada Karika, they will say, see, mrilloha visphulingadyehi srishtirya choditanyatha upaya sovataraya nasti bhedah kathanchana. In fact, there are various means. So you can use a Schrödinger picture, you can guess Heisenberg picture. As long as you can arrive at, it is okay. So I mean, it is what is sort of stated here. In fact, he gives a very beautiful simile. Bhishajohi utpala naladishu vedhadina abhyasyante. See, the doctors, before they handle the human body, he gives this example. See, this itself is an evidence to show that in those days people have been doing surgery. You understand? What he says is, Bhishajaha means doctors. So before they handle the human body and cut the nerve, they try to practice it in the stem of the lotus. Utpala nala means, see the fiber which is there inside, they try to practice cutting that before they touch the human body. Utpala naladishu vedhadina abhyasyante. See, ultimately what you have to do is there, but you sort of practice elsewhere. See, napitaha pitharadishu mundanadini. See, the barber, he says before he straight away does here, so they are supposed to practice on some spherical surface. Mundanadini, yajna shastra vidaha, similarly these people do that. And he says shabdikaha, in fact he goes on to give other examples. In language also, see, Prakriti pratyaya vikara agama varnalopa vyatyadibihi shabdadin pratijanate. See, language is language which is spoken in the society. The grammar that you have constructed is upon you. You can have a completely different set of grammar ultimately giving you the same shabda also. You understand? These are all theoretical tools with which you try to explain something which is there in reality. So there is no constraint on the model. There have been different grammars. The language is same, but different grammars explain the formation of the word in different ways. So as long as you can be internally consistent and finally arrive at the form, so it is fine with us. So this is a very important principle. So finally he says, tasmat upayeshu asatyeshu satya pratipadana pareshu na chodyam asti. So I think I'll just conclude here. So in fact, if you look at here, Jiveshwaradi Vibhaga Kalpana, see, in philosophy, so all of them are Purusha Buddhi Prabhavatvena, means it has all been created by humans. The theory is something which has been presented by humans, and therefore it can be varied and it will be varied. See, the truth is same, but so this is something which is very nicely explained with various examples.
Then what is truth?
Huh?
What is truth?
See, the truth is, you can have Buddhist as religion, Buddhism as religion to teach that you have to be compassionate. Somebody can choose Christianity as religion to say that you have to be compassionate. That you have to be compassionate is truth. That you have to be caring to see to it that the other person is not hurt is truth. And it can be coming through various means. You can say that God will punish you and therefore you have to be. You can say you will be rewarded and therefore you have to be compassionate. So whichever way you want to explain, you want to be compassionate, that is truth. So similarly here, as long as you can sort of predict the position of the planet, it doesn't matter what kind of model that you build. As long as you are able to predict, it is fine with you. You have to first set the purpose. Once you set the purpose, you can have various other means to achieve that.
So compassion is consciousness or mind?
See, compassion is...
Compassion is a product of consciousness.
Because I need it, Karisa.
Compassion cannot be product of consciousness because the mind has been trained differently and therefore people are trained not to be compassionate. It has to do with the mind and the training that the mind has received because that person also has consciousness. Those who go and hit the world towers. Okay, so finally what I want to say is, so this is something, see, in spite of all this kind of scientific tradition that we have, so the history that is being presented to us is not something which is actually true to what is present in the astronomical works. So they look at the Puranas and then comment. So as you were saying, they look at some Purana, some description, some shloka here and there, and then they say that the entire tradition has been so orthodoxy oriented, and therefore they have been trying to present various theories which are unverifiable and so on and so forth. See, in fact, this Patrick Moore has written dozens and dozens of books. So I was surprised to see this. He says the Chinese were very careful observers. Mesopotamians, Babylonians did regular observations. Egyptians were remarkable people capable of carrying out very accurate measurements. Greeks were the first to change the science of astronomy from a mystical science to a true science. The Vedic priests in India believed the world to be supported upon 12 massive pillars, serpent floating on limitless ocean. One cannot help feeling rather sorry for the serpent. Bas, ho gaya.
Sheshnag is
It does not touch any other thing.
refuted by Lalla. Shishyadev Riddhet.
Yeah.
No Sheshnag, Vateshwar, one of the two.
All of them, both of them, both have done. In fact, they say if the serpent
What
were to
about
be supporting
Atlas?
the earth, then what is the serpent supported by?
Yeah.
If the serpent can lie, then why not the earth? I mean, all kinds of things.
What about poor Atlas?
Anyway, the point I wanted to convey was, I mean, this is how, I mean, you will find description about Indian astronomy, which is not quite correct. So, dhanyavadaha.
Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
Question?
Professor,
Yeah.
one observation, many centuries later, you know, Galileo,
Yes.
and he produced to the church in great dismay for the Vatican this idea that the sun was
Correct.
in the center and the earth was moving.
Moving around that, yeah.
And then the cardinal say, well, can't you say that this is just a model?
Yeah.
And they say, no, this is the truth.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know? Just say that is a model, can be a model, and then we all agree, and there is no problem with the process with the church.
Yeah.
And Galileo was, of course, adamant in say, it's not a model,
Correct.
it's the truth.
Truth, yeah.
So this is a kind of important
Yeah.
differentiation.
Yeah.
Then the question I want to ask is something much simpler.
Hmm.
In the medieval time in Europe, but
Hmm.
even before in China, astronomy was at the service of astrology. You know, most of the princes were using astronomy
Correct.
in order to predict their future and know whether they should do a war or not.
Yeah.
Is there something like that in the old 5th century?
No. In fact, that is the kind of thing that I was trying to point out right at the beginning of my lecture, that the purpose of astronomy was to determine time, and not time of this, the time that is used, mera kaal kharab hai. It is not that time. So it is the time of various phenomenon like eclipses and this tithi duration and so on.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with the prediction of the human behavior based on the position of the planets. So this is not the purpose which was driving Indian astronomers to do these predictions accurately.
Can you say how it came that astronomy became astrology?
Astronomy did
By
not.
which twist?
No. Astronomy did not become astrology, in fact. Even now it is.
Not in India, but in general.
In general, I do not know. See, what really drove them. See, in other places, I am not quite sure about it. But as far as the Indian tradition is concerned, so that was not the driving force at all. And one more thing. So since you refer to that model, I would say that Galileo was quite sure because he had the telescope. The only phenomenon which will be able to help you in proving that Earth is moving around the Sun is the parallax that you will be able to measure. So between two positions of the Earth apart, six months apart. But this is not something which is noticeable by naked eye. And therefore it was impossible by anybody, anywhere in the world, to prove that because it is a Pratyaksha Shastra. You have to prove.
Galileo did not measure stellar parallax.
No. See, the point is, with telescope you will be able to do that.
Can do that, but he did not do it.
So the point that I am trying to make here is, whatever was possible through naked eye observation, so they have come. So they said that all the planets are moving around the Sun, and the Sun along with the planets move around the Earth.
Tychonic model.
So this is the point to which Indian astronomers have come, based on pure naked eye observation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me add something to it. If you look at Kepler, now Kepler writes in his, Harmony of the Spheres, that it is a case of pre-established harmony, that God has made astrology a profession by means of which astronomers can earn money. Of course, Kepler did many bad things. One of the things was that he took the observations of Parmeshwaran, which had gone to Tycho, because you see, how could he have measured the orbit of Mars to such a great accuracy? He did not have the instruments. Tycho's masonry instruments are no good. Kepler was nearly blind. How could he have got that accuracy? And he was not an honest scientist. He fudged his data. That fact has just come out about 25 years ago. He fudged his data because he wanted to fit things in. So anyway, the point is that there was a belief in astrology, and from astrology you had astronomy, but that did not happen in Indian tradition. You get astrology as a later day import. Varahami's Panchasiddhantika, or even the Vedang Jyotish. 15 years ago, when astrology was introduced as a course, I raised a public challenge: show me one sentence about astrology in the Vedang Jyotish. There isn't a single sentence about astrology there. There isn't a single sentence in the entire tradition from Vedang Jyotish to Yukti Bhasha. No, Aryabhat, you go by Varahamir, Panchasiddhantika included. You see, there is a clear separation of traditions.
Brihat Samhita and
Brihat Samhita apart.
Jataka,
It starts from
Jataka,
there.
etc.
That is okay, that has. But that's not an astronomy tradition. The astronomy tradition doesn't mention Varahamir, Panchasiddhantika. Does it have a word about astrology?
No, that's why I'm saying. See, they always maintained a clear distinction, and they never connected this. So
Never
the
connected.
purpose of
Interesting.
astronomy is to predict astronomical events.
The timing, measure
Exact
time.
timing. So the tithi. See,
Calendar
tithi
was
is
very important in India for agriculture
agricultural
and for
religious
navigation.
purposes,
And
all
for
purposes.
navigation, astronomy was very
Yeah.
important. These were the two main sources of wealth: overseas trade and agriculture. So that is why the calendar was very important. And these two things were not mixed together as far as one can see. One comment I wanted to make, my own, not his, that when you say there is no model, that's not strictly true. Because you observe, what you see is that all the stars are going around in circles. All right? So you observe that, and that is taken for granted. You see the planets are also going around, though they are deviating. So everybody takes that for granted.
No.
that-
Let me just clarify. See, the
So
first
approximate
premise,
circles.
the premise with which you started is itself wrong. What I'm saying is, I did not say there is no model. I said any model is acceptable. So models do not have anything sacrosanct on them.
I was saying
That is all I'm
something.
trying
I
to
was
say.
saying something more.
Yeah.
That when you are looking at these models of circular motion as natural, it is not the same as a harmony of spheres which are interpenetrating, and you are not able to explain how these spheres penetrate each other and so on, because the planets are thought to be fixed on spheres and you have circular motions. And the idea that when you come to Newtonian physics, it says that the straight line, a complete fictional construct, a straight line is the natural way for everything to move. And therefore, motion in a circle requires a force. Have you seen anything moving in a straight line ever? Nothing ever moves in a straight line. So everything, so this idea that is an artificial, that you need a force to account for circular motion, and straight line motion doesn't need a force. Here there was no force needed to account for circular motion.
Why do things move in a straight line?
They don't. Nothing moves in a straight line. That's only what Newton's laws say. But he is never observed.
We cannot say that. I mean, if you push a ball, it moves. I mean,
What?
say it is, the point is...
Moves in a straight line?
No, just see, it all depends on, how much, when Kepler says, you accept that things move in elliptical orbit. I mean, it is not true at a different level.
Yeah.
So when you see microscopically, so then I think everything becomes anirvachaniya. But at a surface level,
No.
so when I drop a ball, I mean, does it move in a straight line or not? Yes.
No, it doesn't move in a
So,
straight line. It doesn't move in a straight line.
No, you
This
should
is the
consider a
issue.
different plane. I'm just all that I'm saying is, suppose I drop a pen. So what will you say?
No, it will not fall in a straight
then-
line. Pen has a very complicated motion. Drop it and see.
Take a ball.
It has a very complicated motion. It will spin around. Do you have a pen?
No.
Take a look.
No. See, so Earth, suppose you say everything is considered as a point.
No. That again is a
center of
problem.
gravity
No.
of the pen. It
That
doesn't mean
again is a
various other
problem.
things.
That again. Anyway,
So
I
they're
was just
not the
making
pen
a
as an
point.
object.
I was just making a point that there were heavenly spheres in certain.
No, you just first state this. The straight line motion. So at a local level, it is acceptable.
No.
Okay.
Straight line motion in the absence of force in an inertial reference frame. What's an inertial reference frame?
No. So don't go to these things. So when I'm saying, he was talking about, suppose
Not the point.
you define your
We'll
frame.
discuss it later.
Yeah.
We'll discuss it later.
Yeah.
Any other comments or else? Well, then, after thanking Professor Ramasubramanian for his brilliant exposition, for regaling us with Sanskrit, I think we can proceed to the final presentation so that we end on time.
So we invite Kom to make his presentation. So finally, I would like to thank for giving me this opportunity, His Holiness Kom Carpentier. Thank you.
Thank you. 되게 안 돼, 뒤집어서. 하다라. 안 돼. 이 rahul 겸줄이야.
So it's not displaying, is it?
Well, I think it's coming now, right? But it's not on my screen yet, so.
It's not on anybody's screen.
되게 안 돼, 가서 돼.
Or else will that work on it?
선진주제.
Yeah, because I think
겸줄게 잘 말했어. 그러다. 저서 이니 하다가 아주 강한 때서 이니 원주고 포장한테 그랬어 그래. 듣지야 돼. 콩으로 그랬어 그래. 콩으로.
So before you start, His Holiness, is a question to you, because you said Rahu Karan Masmin, in which case, related to that one, for example, Mount Kailash is accepted as an abode of Shiv.
The
So-
Ganga River
Lare,
is considered something very, very sacred.
sacred.
Oh. So because you see that water is come from Mount Kailash. Mount Kailash, the seat or the palace of
Shiva. Lare.
So
is there-
I
Lare.
usually use the mentioning the Shivaji, his permanent residence is inside Tibet. So from that viewpoint, we can consider Shivaji is Tibetan god. No? So then Buddha is Indian. So our Buddha. So spiritually, this is something very, very close. So your Deva or your sort of Kasoda, God is actually Tibetan.
So His Holiness was asking whether you have any authentic scriptural sources stating that Mount Kailash is abode of Shiva.
Some Buddhist literature, mainly tantric, you see mentioning there are 24 different areas where you see some so the Shivaji's special blessing there. So Mount Kailash is the main place. So many people spend years some meditation because you see, consider that is something very sacred. And also wherever Shivaji's sort of place, the Hiruka's place, something sort of
Connected.
kind
of connected.
like that. So Jalendra, Kulu, and so on is 24 areas. Unichi.
Tirthasthan.
Ah.
Places of pilgrimage.
So I'm wondering, you see, according which tradition is it consider or describe the Mount Kailash is the very secret because of Shivaji's Sarvaswati place.
About.
See, I think there are things which are small compositions of Nilakantha, so which speak of this, and there are various references in literature also, the classical literature. So there will be chapters which describe this, that it is the abode. So for instance, even Kalidasa's work, so we have this. So in this literature we have, Puranas will definitely have. I can find out the references. Shiva Purana will definitely have. And there are Mahatmyas which speak of various kshetras. So Kailasa Mahatmya also is there. And later, recent times, Nilakantha is also described in great detail. Okay, so this is while describing this Ganga Avatarana, so they will speak of this as the abode. So this any description of Ganga, so will be related to that.
Yes, that's
So that will be there. Ganga definitely I can even right away look at and tell you. So there are several pieces of literature which can give this. Puranic as well as classical Sanskrit literature as well as exclusively devoted to that.
Om Guru Bhyo Namaha. Your Holiness, again, thanks for this opportunity. And what I will try to do is to summarize the insights and the perceptions that have emerged in a number of scientific disciplines over the last half a century, perhaps more, and try to draw a few implications of where it is leading science and where it is leading humanity. Because the fundamental question is always how definable, how explainable, how describable is reality, and what is nature. You know, nature itself is a very elusive term because it means what is born. So all things that are born are nature, if you look back to the Latin origin. So I will obviously not endorse all the conclusions or speculations that have been presented here, but it will be a sort of a panorama to give food for thought, to understand where scientific investigation is leading and where it is definitely connecting with traditional knowledge of many civilizations, and especially with what I would call Indo-Indic and Indo-Tibetan civilization. Sometimes I will not mention these relations because I will let the audience draw their own conclusions. I mean, the connections are there to be made. People can feel them aesthetically, as it were, or intuitively. But a few of the facts provide the basis for reflection. So I will just say that according to the three of the founders of the modern scientific, you might say, intellectual construction, or the scientific civilization, if we want to call it that way, there is that combination of observation and calculations in science, rational mechanics as a basis for physics, and a model for natural sciences. That is positivism, that's saying that we should be able to explain people and society just as we explain physical creatures. In any scientific theory about nature, one can only speak of science to the precise extent that it involves mathematics. This was Kant's specification. It is not the laws of nature that scientists spell, but laws regulating phenomena that they can grasp, retrieve from an ocean. This is by a French scientist called Dominique Lecourt. And the comparison has been given by somebody else, Professor Hans-Peter Dur, whom I believe was known to Your Holiness. It's like a net to catch fish above a certain size. And if the fish is smaller than that size, then you may not realize it's there, and so you need to get a better net. But how small can the fish net be? And will there always be fish and other creatures that are too small to be captured by your net?
See this previous thing, ocean, we have the same thing in Aryabhatiya. Sadasajnana samudrat samudritam devata prasadena. Samudrat jnanam praptam. So it looks like almost.
Indeed. Now, Jona Friedman has pointed out that the reduction of human experience to mathematical expression strips down the model presented by science as a map of the universe in which we live. And computing in Latin comes from the verb computere, which means actually to think. Therefore, to think and to compute or count are related, and that in itself shows how subjective computing could be, just as thinking is. Of course, Korzybski, one of the founders of modern semantic theory, has said in a very pithy sentence, the map is not the territory. You may draw a map of a country, but obviously the map is not the territory, although it can give you a lot of information about that territory, some of it right and some of it possibly wrong. Science, of course, must be communicable. Something must refer to something already known to others. So meaning is a strange attractor. This is by T.R. Young, and I will show something about strange attractors later on. The whole idea is that in order for people to communicate, they must find something that they can share because they have experienced it. And until that happens, there can be no communication. For example, if I point to a glass and call it by another name in another language, somebody will be able to relate to what I'm saying because they know how a glass looks and they have seen a glass and used a glass in their own language. So John Wheeler said over 30 years ago that the physical world is increasingly seen as made of information with energy and matter as incidentals. These were his exact terms. But of course, that only essentially moves the problem, which is what is information. Now, if you look, for example, at the golden number in nature, which is one of the constant proportions that we find, we see that whether it's in flowers, in galaxies, in the shape of hurricanes, in any structures, I wouldn't say any, but in so many structures, whether infinitesimal or gigantic, we find the same proportions, which in itself gives us a sense of course, the law of relations, but also how things become communicable because we can see some common patterns.
Just out of my curiosity, under the whole galaxy, you see, 그것도 연도 걸고 도와. 애는 아주 먼 곳이도 연도 커야 지금 저가래.
So the picture, the galaxy is seen as if it's
Spiral.
I mean, the higher level of the whole galaxy also go like that. And then many cases, you see, certain sort of orchidea, many cases go like that. I think very rare go like that. What is why? Why?
That depends on which side you see it from.
It's like left and right.
One side it will be going like this. If you see it from the other side, it's going like that.
But 당연한 아주 저분이 대가리 두 때에 두잖아요. 두 도전에 있어와. 티 가르쳐 망쳐지.
We are talking about from the perspective of people on Earth. Why does that happen?
I am not sure it happened.
Actually, that's also I'm not entirely sure about it. I don't know if anyone in this panel has a definite answer.
The galaxies, you see, whole galaxies go like that. I don't think you see wind or air. I don't think there's much effect. But some other sort of forces go like that.
Well, this is seen as a effect of gravitation and obviously the forces of expansion among. In other words, that is definitely an effect of the very structure of the universe that shapes galaxies in this way?
I would differ with that, but that basically the spiral thing has to be explained, and you either explain with dark matter or you explain without dark matter.
Only dark matter.
Yes, either you put in dark matter as it's done in other theories, or you remove it as it's removed in my theory. But
That's true. There is no final.
there's no answer to it.
Spiraling is only due to the heavy mass somewhere. And the initial
no.
initial thing which has set, we will not be able to explain. We can only say that it is happening and therefore we have to speculate. So in the initial case, we will not be able to say why it is.
Very difficult to make the definition heavy and light. I think
course.
it's very difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
The galaxy level, I don't think
No, it
we
is.
can say that.
No, it is. That is why, I mean, nowadays, unable to explain. So people are saying that almost 90+% is only dark matter.
Yeah, which is again highly questionable. It's
Failure to explain, that's failure of Newtonian physics.
Like
Primarily.
Milky
Way. Yeah.
In the center is some
That
What
is
was
believed
that?
to be the case. It is believed to be the case that there is a huge black hole or something sitting at the
Yes,
center.
yes.
There's a huge mass sitting at the center. Let's not talk of black holes.
That's right, because we do not know what sort of mass it is, and it may not be a black hole in all cases, in all galaxies. But again, you see, when we are talking about attractors, we are talking about mathematical representations of set of numerical values towards which systems tend to evolve and in which they remain. You see, this has been a whole field of mathematical representation which obviously accounts for the way in which you see patterns at all levels of existence creating and essentially remaining in a stable, relatively stable position. You know, these are things which, of course, are aesthetically very pleasant, very beautiful when they are represented, but they correspond to insights into the way in which reality behaves, as it were, you know, at certain stages. Now, information is not knowledge per se. It is only raw data which have to be inserted in a worldview through insight. That the insight is the term used by some scientists. The value of information is dependent on the context. Knowledge is not mechanically communicable, as the context and worldview are different for each actor. Symbolic interaction theory, symbols used to create shared frame of meaning. Obviously, in order to arrive at an understanding, you have to build a symbolic sign, which gives people a common understanding, which may be very approximate, but which still gives them a common ground, you see. Just for example, a mandala or the Vajra, these are symbols which in a given context, in the context of Buddhist culture, do enable people to understand a particular aspect of reality. So any scientific theory is intended to facilitate the insertion of new information at a proper place in what is already known. It is meant to build and maintain consistency in a worldview. And of course, when we see that it is not consistent with that worldview, either it means that it has to be rejected because it is erroneous, or that the worldview itself has to change. And this is the way that knowledge proceeds. Now, Jacques Vallée, who is one of my favorite scientist engineers, he's one of the founders, you might say, of, I wouldn't say founders, but he's one of the great names in computer science, has said that the physics of information and the physics of matter, energy, obey different rules. And that information is statistically spread out within an infinite memory bank. Therefore, he says the universe is a substratum of a meta-reality of the information structure. Consciousness travels across information packets and in the process creates space and time. So he says on that basis, you have to move beyond the quest for the unified field theory and towards the reconciliation of the four forces through more and more complex theory, which involves so many more dimensions and multiverses and strings and so on and so forth. He says you can leave that to those who want to work on this, but you need to have a a theory, you need to have a much better understanding of the physics of information, which he calls the theory of everything else. In other words, everything which is not directly, you might say, related to what.
Why do you have to do all that?
Why do I have to do what? You mean to get into
No words, just sign.
Why do you need the theory of everything? And why do you,
He doesn't say that we need it. He says that that's what scientists are definitely pursuing. And he proposes to look much more closely at the theory of information. You see, he says whether or not we achieve a unified field theory, grand unification, he says, I don't know, and I very seriously doubt it. But he says we have to look at information as the key to how...
I don't accept that, but we can talk another.
No, I would just say that this question is just like asking, why do you desire?
Why do?
Why do you desire? Desire is something which arouses. Similarly, I think this inquiry that we have...
You can desire something, you can desire to kill somebody, but then comes the reason and say, I don't do it. And to say desire is not enough.
What I'm
I
saying
think
is...
maybe we should let him speak.
Yes.
Let him continue.
Again, I am not, as I pointed out at the beginning, I am not necessarily taking sides in all those issues. I am presenting a series of perspectives and visions, and then letting the audience, as it were, see where things are going as far as some scientific schools are concerned. As I said, we can be very doubtful about whether a grand unified theory can be reached. And of course, the fact that people think it's a very important and almost essential goal of science is something that is itself philosophically questionable. It has to do with a certain underlying philosophy, I believe. Now, it has been said, and here I am quoting Friedman and others, that the main feature of our universe is that it is erratic. For example, in numbers, take those which don't have any regularity and cannot be generated by any rule, such as prime numbers. They are the most numerous. So the erratic character of reality can be rationalized by assuming that we only know it in momentary states of dynamic processes, which appear incoherent when seen apart from the whole. We are back to the notion of a holistic process or system in which any segment or fragment will appear unexplainable if we take it apart from the entire process of which it is a part. So obviously the conclusion is that the only perfect model of reality is reality itself and not any of the images we have or make of it, which in itself should be perhaps the sign of a likely defeat for any grand unified field theory. Now, I'll just mention briefly something which I believe is a very symbolically important aspect of modern research, which is the whole issue of fractals as we see them in nature. You might say that in all aspects of reality, whether it's in geography when we map a coastline or when we watch cloud patterns, we see fractals, which are in fact represented by mathematical equation, which you see on the right. And the fractals have a feature that is, of course, that they are self-replicating, in the sense as small in the scale of magnitude as you go in a fractal, you will find fractals that will be very similar in pattern to the fractal of which they are a part. And you can either expand or reduce by a proportion of 100, of 1,000, and you will still see fractals within the fractals. So you are talking about this pattern which endlessly reproduces the same degree of complexity at whatever level you are at. Now, this, again, this is not my conclusion, but there is, of course, an important school of physicists who believe that in the light of what is coming out, the universe may not make sense. And what they mean by that is that Einstein's belief or conviction that you could get to a very beautiful, elegant, and simple description of the universe, which would make the universe correspond to what we understand in terms of our natural perception and our logical faculty, that may not be available. In other words, I'm quoting Albert Einstein's, and this is from Quanta magazine, by the way. It says, Albert Einstein dreamed that the laws of nature are sublimely beautiful, inevitable, and self-contained. Without it, physicists face the harsh prospect that those laws are just an arbitrary, messy outcome of random fluctuations in the fabric of space and time. Now, going into some further details, string theory, a hypothetical theory of everything that regards particles as invisibly small vibrating lines, posits that space-time is 10-dimensional. At the human scale, we experience just 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, but string theories argue that 6 extra dimensions are tightly noted at every point in the fabric of our 4D reality. And Busso and Polchinski calculated that there are around 10 at the power of 500 different ways for those 6 dimensions to be noted, all tying up various amounts of energy, making an inconceivably vast and diverse array of universes possible. In other words, naturalness is not required. There isn't a single inevitable perfect universe. Now, that's one of the views, which may show that actually physics is no longer able to make sense to its own practitioners. So therefore, when a model becomes unwieldy and unmanageable, as was the case for the epicycles theory of medieval astronomy, that's when Copernicus came, and then Galileo, and they brought to Europe a much simpler model, which clearly resolved some of the inconsistencies in the old epicycle model. Now, Neil Turok from the Perimeter Institute, which is one of the, you might say, frontier research centers of science, has said some very interesting things, some very thought-provoking things. And he says that given that everything, I'm quoting only the last paragraph, given that everything turned out to be very simple yet extremely puzzling in its simplicity, it's just perfect for what Perimeter's here to do. We have to get people to try to find the new principles that will explain the simplicity. So in other words, we see now that we have come perhaps not to the end of the line, but we are coming to the end of the line of the number of parameters, because in the standard model, it is about 18. The number in grand unified theories is typically 100. In supersymmetric theories, the minimum is 120. And string theory seems to predict 10 to the power of 1,000 different possible laws of physics. So at that point, obviously, you are no longer dealing with laws of physics. And he says it is the ultimate catastrophe that theoretical physics has led to this crazy situation where the physicists are utterly confused and seem not to have any predictions at all. Now, this, of course, anthropic could be used as a word, some say anthropomorphic. It is a proposal that has been made by some scientists to rescue science, saying that basically to recover meaning, science has to be seen as an art. In other words, it has to be an activity that is pursued from a human perspective, because that's the only one we have. So that's why it can be called anthropomorphic and anthropic. And see the cosmos in the human image, if only for very pragmatic reasons, that it makes the whole thing much more understandable. I mean, this connects, it's almost facetious, but it connects to the old models of Purusha, the cosmic man, which you had in all ancient cosmologies, and which Adam Kadmon, Tetragrammaton, and the Vitruvian man, and in India you had, of course, the Purusha. So Friedman says, human beings, on the basis of their insight, build out of the information they gather an imaginary world in such a way that it never contradicts the real world as they experience it. A physical theory based on some analogies with human behavior would be the most suitable to account for the erratic nature of a hyper-complex universe. So it is basically the opposite of the conventional understanding of chaos theory, because it turns a mechanistic mathematical worldview that is today's, you might say, dominant scientific paradigm, into an anthropomorphic one, chaos in order rather than order in chaos. So the central feature of living systems is the nonlinearity of their dynamics, which is a property of chaos. Now, this just as an illustration, the rhizome structure brings us back to what Professor Luigi showed in his, one of his slides, which is the way in which a rhizome, which is a vegetal structure, it's an elementary plant form, how complex it is, because all the elements of that rhizome are connected to each other, so it is a network, but there is no hierarchy as such. It's not a tree which has a trunk, roots, and branches. It's something which is essentially like an organism, and which seems to be the very structure of the universe as a whole. So in that rhizome structure, we can see a form of organization which clearly shows how everything is related to everything else, and how, at the same time, there is no perceptible pattern of order as we understand it. Now, I'm giving an analogy here to what has been found to exist in forest lands, which is an internet of fungus beneath the earth. This is a word, an expression coined by some plant biologists and botanists to describe the interrelations, the interconnections that the energy and nourishment network that supports a forest beneath the earth. And therefore, essentially, a forest which seems to be made of separate trees is in fact like a network or a web that essentially exists largely underground. And what we see on the surface is actually a manifestation of something which is far more connected than the individual trees seem to be. Now, here we touch briefly on the matter of laws, which has been discussed throughout the day. So laws or habits, and order and chaos are two sides of a coin. We describe laws, such as gravity, but we don't know how they operate. Of course, how does the apple know the gravitational force, and why does it yield to it? An observer builds a theory according to his experience of reality. A given behavior appears erratic to the observer unaware of the context and laws accounting for it. Process on one scale, structure on another. You know, if you look at a process in a given period of time, it is a structure, but if you look at it over a wider period of time, you realize that it's a process. It's continuously evolving, so the structure is not permanent. For example, what appears discontinuous in a given space, such as two-dimensional, may be continuous in another space, three-dimensional. The universe, according to some experiments, may be written on a two-dimensional surface, although we perceived it as a three-dimensional, the Matrix, if you remember the film. Of course, I'm not getting into the merit of these theories. I'm just laying them out to sort of open minds to the various possibilities that exist. So conversely, the holographic principle posits that a theory describing the 2D boundary of a 3D region completely applies to the 3D region itself. So, and in chaos theory, interesting, connected to what we said about Shunyavad, there can be more than one, but less than two dimensions. Laws are limited and habits change. Many laws of nature are found not to extend to a larger framework. Nonlinear systems, for example, do not tend towards entropy. Are there natural laws or natural evolving and changing habits? This is Sheldrake's contention, that what we call laws are actually changeable, and they are actually habits that are acquired by those that follow those habits, whether they are plants or animals, because there has been a sort of a interrelated learning process from one to another, and they adopt habits from their own community, as it were. So, you know, in a sense, it is a sort of a co-evolving process. Order may be created out of disorder, but erratic behavior is the flip side of order. And the Indic traditional perspective integrates this notion very well, because in India there is no notion of order as opposed to disorder. You know, it's very visible even today in India. but the fact is that there is a natural concept that order and disorder are constantly interacting and preserve a certain healthiness, provided one of the two does not take over the other. You see, when you have too much order, you end up having conformity, dictatorship, oppression. When you have too much disorder, of course, you can have breakdown. So there has to be this dynamic interplay between the two, which is, I think, what the Indic concept of a social structure teaches us. So any attempt to imagine a given order to the universe results in making it look even more disorderly. This is another contention that comes out of observation. Now here I'm drawing upon the famous verse from the Bhagavad Gita that says, I'm the game of dice. As opposed to a ladder of rising complexity, the universe presents a picture of constant complexity at all levels. And this is something which is very challenging and very interesting, because the idea that we have, which is a sort of intuitive idea that, things start very small and very simple, and then they build up and they become more and more complex, well, it may not be true, at least in certain fields of reality, because the deeper you go, you find as much complexity as in larger scales. So the universe does not evolve from the simplest to the most complex, but maintains the same complexity at all levels, as seen in genetics. There is a conservation of complexity, just there is a conservation of energy. All its components are as complex as the whole, hologram concept. There are, George Cantor, the mathematician of transfinity, there are as many even numbers as there are integers, odd numbers and even numbers, which in itself is a very interesting intellectual subject of contemplation. So every component of the universe depends upon an infinite number of infinitely complex entities which all communicate with each other and influence each other mutually. Back to Pratitya Samutpada. The universe is erratic even for an infinite mind, which is why the Rig Veda asks this question that perhaps he doesn't know. God does not play with dice, the dice play with him. Again, don't take God literally, but all this is meant to say is that the sort of uncertainty applies even to the highest level of organization, if you know what I mean. Now, the constructor theory, which is another popular theory, gives the recipe and exact characterization in fundamental physics. It is digitally coded information that can act as a constructor and has resiliency. The capacity, once it is instantiated in physical systems, to remain so instantiated. In constructor theory, this is called knowledge. We have had some discussions about consciousness, the definition of consciousness. And here we have a proposal for a definition of knowledge. In a sense, digitally coded information, digitally, you know what I mean, it is that can act as a constructor because it leads to the ability to make something, and it has the resiliency because it can preserve itself. It can last through generations or cycles. So it seems we can never reconcile laws of physics with biological processes. That's another great issue between physicists and biologists, because the attempt to make biological laws, biological processes obey the law of physics so far have not been successful. Now we come to, very briefly, space. We have been talking about space, and some of the provocative thought about space sees the difference between quantum space and geometric space. I'm sure there will be a lot of controversy and discussion about this. But space-time may be self-generating, autopoietic, capable of creating itself virtually out of nothing. This is one of the theses of Sheldrake, among others. It could also dilate or contract randomly for reasons not known to us. The universe, being embedded in space-time, may contract and expand erratically along with it. So there is a very valid alternative perspective of the universe, which is that it's infinite and has no boundary. And
this is which FRW model? Some there would be bounded ones, no?
Yeah.
It's closed ones. So which one, there would be a parabolic one or something else where there would be no boundary?
No, it would be parabolic, but then there are also other views that say that it may actually, it may escape any of those two.
Yes, but if it is closed, then it would have a boundary.
Yeah, of course, if it's closed. In this case, you are talking about an
open model.
Yes, an open model. So, of course, here we are talking about space defined as a quantum or physical space distinct from a geometric space, which is an artificial construct of our minds. And here again, we are with the whole issue of space. Now, the field theory as the ultimate reality is now being reviewed. The new fundamental theory is based on information exchange among physical processes. And this is Lee Smolin's submission. Those processes then must build knowledge out of that information to inform their behavior. Inform, which means give form, So in a sense, drawing certain knowledge that you then use to create a form, to form yourself. The adaptive laws of evolution may be applicable to the universe and to all its components, which in itself would be a very welcome sign, because that means you could actually see an evolving, adapting universe, and that would make it like a biological entity. It would make it, in a sense, much easier to understand for us. The laws of nature may be provisional, and not just because of our own observational limitations. That was Hans-Peter Durr's thesis. Hence, prediction and replications have limited use for verification. Truth statements are rather fractal truth quotients. Falsification makes little sense in nonlinear dynamic systems. So natural laws may result from individual or collective acts of the entities regulated by them. Just as we as a society or as a group end up creating laws which end up taking a force of their own. They take a sort of a resistance and they become what we call traditions or rituals, and they can last for thousands of years. The physical universe may be regulated by laws derived from the behavior of its components according to a total conscious process. Of course, that's a speculation, but it brings us to reality as consciousness as such, in a sense that the universe is a conscious whole. And by itself, I guess, science as it is today would never be able to accept that, because it would say, well, what is the proof, in the sense that...
like Solaris on a magnified scale. There is a lot of science fiction on that.
Of course. This is a very inspiring theme for science fiction. Now, this is just an illustration to show that if you look at very microscopic aspects of the body, of the human body, and if, for example, here you have, from electron microscopy, a reproduction of what brain cells, glia, look like, and the other one is a transversal cut of the spinal cord, you see in these images there is something that is very familiar to us, and then you say, well, it looks like, this looks like trees, and this looks like, well, you could think of many things. It looks like organs, it looks like, I would let you think of what it suggests to you. It's definitely a form of art. Now, why?
Butterfly.
Yes, well, that's true too. Now, you might say, why is that so? Here is where you have to allow the possibility that consciousness is the only thing through which we can see things, and therefore it always gives us a visual image that corresponds to our perception, to our abilities, even to our culture. So in a sense, we see what we are conditioned to see. Otherwise, something which is not related to our experience remains invisible. So naturally, for us to understand anything, we have to translate it, just like we translate a language into a language we know. We have to translate a particular perception into a conception, which is our own intellectual or sensorial experience. Now, this here is from the Journal Biology PLOS, PFL, your sister institution, the Lausanne Institute of Technology, a team led by Professor Michael Herzog. And they have done some very interesting things about consciousness. This is a very recent publication. It's 2 weeks ago. Researchers say our consciousness is not a continuous stream of input. Instead, the brain processes information in small chunks up to 400 milliseconds. The unconsciousness gaps in between are then rendered out, in the sense that we take out the intervals and we keep the process as if it were continuous. Scientists say this two-step model of processing demonstrates a small gap for retrospective processing before we become aware. In other words, we don't become aware of what we see as we see it. We become aware after a very small period of time, during which the mind corrects what we have seen and presents to us a coherent picture. So in a sense, what we see consciously is already a memory of what we have seen. It is not the actual sight. It is some sort of a delayed transmission. It's like when we get a delayed TV transmission, and of course if it comes from outer space it takes a very long time to get to us, but in this case it's a very minute time delay, but it shows how the mind has to organize everything before we can actually become aware of it, which is a very interesting thing about the nature of consciousness and of the mind.
No, this is perception, is not consciousness.
Yeah, but then, all right.
No, that's very important.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. No, anyway.
Supposing you take a drug which alters your, would you say it alters your perception or your consciousness? Because you may see the same thing as something completely different under the influence of the drug.
This
is it a change of perception or change of consciousness? It's still perceiving the same thing. The object is the same. So the perception-
Consciousness is what make you perceive your different state of mind.
Okay, I have a more specific question for you. In that case...
No, don't go ahead. Don't.
No, but it's interesting because I myself wanted to get to this. I think His Holiness will also like to see this. Assuming that we accept Herzog's conclusion that the brain, and this is based on a lot of experimentation, supposing that the brain perceives something and then takes a little time to prepare it and make it consistent for us, because what it gets is a series of flashes and it gives us a continuous view. Now, would you call the first one, which is the initial thing of which we are not aware, would you call that consciousness, and then would you call the second stage perception? Or would it be the first one be perception, and then would the second one be consciousness rearranging perception?
It's all perception. Consciousness is when comes the luminosity and say, oh, it's Mozart. That is...
Perception of perception.
Consciousness is the final luminosity, which is also, however, coming from the basic presence of yourself without any, addition, notion of mind and thought. Those are, but...
So that's what Yona Friedman calls insight. Yes, you call it consciousness. Now, analysis and synthesis, seeing all things and events as separate and distinct, is an intellectual convention for the sake of intelligibility. However, that mode of perception makes all observable reality look erratic. In other words, the flip side of this is that on the one hand, we see things separately, but then we can't see that they are one, which is exactly the difference between the perception of the enlightened one and the perception of most people, which is a very atomistic and very sort of sundered and split perception. So a holistic vision of all components and their interactions makes sense out of the apparent chaos. And that is why one is able to transcend the sense of divisiveness, of fear, of hatred, of things that go wrong. The greatest objection that any normal person will tell you whenever you talk about God or even a spiritual conception, will say, but why does God or whoever is up there, why does he allow so much evil and so much suffering? And of course, let's face it, Western religions don't have a very satisfactory answer to that. But if you look at it from the standpoint of Buddhism and of the Indic vision, you see that this holistic vision is what enables us to reconcile opposites, reconciliatio oppositorum, as opposed to this tunnel vision that we have that projects on different things and gets very different impressions and get an impression of complete incoherence and injustice. And therefore gets us a sense that why should we have any kind of inner life if we cannot even make sense of what is around us? Obviously there is something wrong, therefore we cannot get, as it were, ultimate salvation or liberation. Now, the theory of double causality is something which I just wanted to touch upon briefly, because it's something which has been developed by a French scientist called Guillemot. And it is very interesting because even though he proceeded from purely scientific data, he comes to something which is very consistent with some of the Buddhist teachings in the matter. I'm sorry that this graphic is not readable because it's too small, probably.
It's a little small, yeah.
But its intentions, basically the gist of it is that intentions derived from past affect the future, which in turn affects the present. So in a sense, there is a sort of a feedback loop, which he calls retrocausality. And so can the present affect the past? Which in itself is a very counterintuitive idea. But, and I will not go into it now because it would take us into too many things, but I invite you to refer to it. There are a few papers on this. There is also a book. And it has received a very warm welcome in certain scientific circles and also in certain high-tech research circles.
Retrocausality is slightly different from what I was talking about. Present can affect the past, or future can affect the present. That is perfectly possible physically, and that's what mixed-type functional differential equations are about. But you cannot calculate it, or you cannot do it mechanistically. That is the problem, that if you talk of retrocausality, then as in the case of causality, you imagine that something happens in the past, you can use it to control the future. Something happens in the future, you can use it to control the past. That is no longer true. So there was a conference on retrocausality long back, about somewhere in Groningen with Hugh Price and others. A big debate on this issue. So I think that this was also again organized in Dresden. There are people, the Wheeler-Feynman theory, where exactly this sort of thing can happen. You send an impulse to the future and get it back into the past. But I think that, I can't read it, so I cannot say. I can't.
Yeah, there is a very interesting analogy provided to illustrate what he means. But if we have time, I will mention it briefly. But just now I want to. So the interface theory of perception is very well known, but it's also very interesting from a philosophical and psychological point of view. I quote the interface theory of perception, which is a classic in the field by Hoffman, Singh, and Prakash. What we experience is nothing more than a set of species-specific icons. It's on a computer screen. You know, science tends to mimic the state of technology. So it says, we have computers, so now you can talk the language of computers because people will understand. User-friendly shortcuts for staying alive and reproducing. Similarly, there is no causal power inherent to the objects we perceive. It appears that a tennis racket can cause a ball to move, but that is nothing more than a juxtaposition of icons in our interface. The real causal powers are hidden from us, according to the interface theory of perception. Basically, what you see are not the things that are there. They are signals that your consciousness has been trained to capture and interpret to enable you to carry on with life and hopefully to reproduce yourself. And that in itself means that we definitely live in a universe of our own projection. Again, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that what is there is very different from what we see, possibly. And second, that there are many, many things that are there just around us that we don't see clearly. Why? Because we are not programmed, we are not trained to see them, and basically because they probably would not have any useful application for us, and they might be detrimental because information overload is a very bad thing. I mean, if you get too much information, you can lose awareness. You can literally be unable to protect yourself from what is threatening you or visualize what is actually advantageous to you. So you have to narrow down, you have to select, you have to trim, you have to spruce reality to keep it manageable. So that is essentially what the theory of perception, interface theory of perception tells you. Now here there is of course a very beautiful analogy between textiles, texts, and fractal crystals. Because you know, a textile and a text come from the same source. A textile and a text are similar kinds of creatures. A text is something in which you weave words. You know, you weave letters into words and words into sentences and sentences into a text. So space-time seen as a web, a yarn of fabric, jala, tantra, logos. We forget that logos, which many people think in Christianity means Christ, or it means God, or it means the word, the verb. But in fact, logos means a web. So you find the very notion of jala or tantra, you know, Indra Jala in there. Woven out of thread-like elements. A gaseous crystalline structure shaped by a non-Euclidean Riemannian geometry. The flow of time is the reading order followed by the consciousness of the observer-participator, who both writes and reads, because we are not just readers, we are also writing. Essentially, we are participating in reality.
I think, if I just interrupt, a very nice analogy here, that if you actually have something going backward in time, how would you see it? So supposing you take, let us say, a pair creation, which is, you think of it as a single electron going forward in time and a positron, which is the electron coming back in time. So you would see both of them, whatever happens, this is how you would see them. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. In the space-time web, all things are in one single place eternally. Weisskopf's implicate order, no inside and no outside. Of course, that's the very notion of nirvana, of Maya, actually it goes beyond. It's actually the resolution of Maya. It is the realization of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, you know, the supreme and unequaled awakening. Now, this was just a nice analogy between the quasi-crystals, which are natural structures, and Penrose's constructions. Penrose's pavings, which are essentially meant to show that there are certain geometry structures in nature at the subatomic level that we obviously have difficulty understanding in our geometric mindset, but which give us a sense of what the structure of reality may actually look like beyond our accepted models. You know, that there is that sort of ability for things to be at the same time crystalline and essentially soft. You know, the quasi-crystals are actually like gooey. You see, they are crystals, but yet they have a sort of a structure like soft mud. So that in itself is very hard to guess because it's counterintuitive, but it is very much an aspect of reality as it is perceived more and more in certain domains.
Why do you call it Penrose paving, not Islamic art?
Well, because Penrose has done the geometrical structure for it, and he has got the calculations, you know, the geometric and algebraical basis for it. So, I mean, it has been given this name, so I acknowledge it. The underlying reality is thought to be continuous, but it is perceived in a discontinuous manner. We already said that in fragments of space-time by the sense organs. Now, consciousness, here is a big controversy, sensus communis, however, restores the underlying continuity of reality to make sense of what is perceived. It gives us a partial glimpse of the higher harmony or rhythm of being. I think that would not be too far from what you said, you know, because that ability to look beyond the discontinuity and perceive the total pattern. Enhanced perceptions of the broader, deeper reality are gained through heightened awareness, through imagination, psychic practices, meditation, or the consumption of certain psychotropic chemicals, DMT in particular. Now, this was, of course, a stimulus presentation that was done by that team at EPFL, which I mentioned before, by Professor Herzog's team. And what he showed is that the way our perception works, you see, if you have in a dark room a person sitting in front of a screen, and you light very briefly a green circle, in this case it's an ellipse, and then a red ellipse, just one after the other, the person will see the green ellipse moving towards on that axis, towards what you might call the northeast, and will actually change color midway and become red. So that's basically what you will perceive when in fact there are two points or circles that have not ever met and that are quite separate. But it's an effect of the way in which our mind restores a continuity which is not there originally. Now, an interesting reflection is that all numbers or mathematical processes refer to the number 1 as a symbol of all distinct entities. Yet, reality is better described by the fundamental non-numerical properties of 1, its individuality and indivisibility. Mathematics use the signs or symbols of other forms of perception, but abstracts them and robs them of their real existence. Now, this is something which, you know, you were referring to when you talked about formal mathematics. Does a new science require a new mathematics? And this is something presented by Afghani Hamed, who is an Iranian physicist working in America, one of the most brilliant minds I can think of. And he has done some extraordinarily interesting work also in the Perimeter Institute, and he himself is working on a new mathematics and essentially an alternative to the particle-based depiction of subatomic physics. Now, I will end by quoting Michael Talbot, who was one of the scientific researchers who was fascinated by the connections between science and ancient philosophy. And he established a very useful comparison between Swami Vivekananda's teachings and Hermann Minkowski, who was one of the mentors of Einstein. And he says there are many parallel concepts between the ancient philosophies of the East and the emerging philosophies of the West. Certain concepts are so similar that it becomes impossible to discern whether some statements were made by the mystic or the physicist. Esalen Institute psychologist Lawrence Leshan gives an example of such an indistinguishable statement. The absolute is everything that exists. This absolute has become the universe as we perceive it by coming through time, space, and causation. This is a central idea of Minkowski. Time, space, and causation are like the glass through which the absolute is seen, and when it is seen, it appears as the universe. Now, we at once gather from that this universe that in the universe there is neither time, space, nor causation. What we may call causation begins after, if we may be permitted to say so, the degeneration of the absolute into the phenomenal and not before. So my conclusion is that if we are talking about the future of science, we probably have to remember the lessons of the, among others, in Europe, the 18th century school of natural philosophy, which had, among others, Schelling, and many of them were influenced by Indian philosophy. They proposed to restore the unity of knowledge, man and nature, and they were fighting the mechanicists and the materialists in science, feeling that unless you were able to keep philosophy and science together as a study of nature, you would not be able to achieve a real and meaningful and also a positive understanding of nature. And of course, Fritjof Capra wrote a book on a similar topic. He referred to Leonardo da Vinci's method. And
he wrote the Tao of Physics 40 years before this quotation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's true. I mean, I'm simply here specifically mentioning Vivekananda and Minkowski because it just applies particularly to the Indian tradition. But it's true that he did quote innumerable examples. And at that time, as you know, he got into some trouble with a number of scientists who said, yeah, but these comparisons, why are you making them? You know, this is not science. This is some sort of soft-headed mysticism. So this is essentially the little panorama which I wanted to present. Given the much more specialized and much more in-depth presentations we have heard before from acknowledged specialists in their respective fields, I wanted to try to give a summary of where our philosophies of science are taking us, and I hope that this could be useful in building a new educational and scientific instruction system all over the world, but India could be a very good country to lead because of its own tradition and its lack of too many sort of indigenous objections to these new ways of thinking. You know, in the sense, India is naturally ready to consider these perspectives, and therefore, we all know that whenever a country achieves greater I would say power influence in the world, generally it also leads to it having greater say in matters of scientific policy, and even in terms of discovery and progress. Therefore, it was the case of several Western countries in the last few centuries, which were dominant in many fields. Now I think Asia is coming into its own again, and therefore Asia could provide a leadership in this field, and I hope that a number of institutions, such as the Nalanda University and the Sanchit University, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and a number of other universities, IITs, etc., could get involved in this endeavor. So thank you very much.
Now it seems time for meditation. Silent meditation. It's been a long day.
So you are quoting Smolin, no? Which text it was from? Is it Trouble with Physics or?
This was one of his recent articles. If you are referring to his actual quote, it's from a recent article of his. I believe I have mentioned the quote, the source. And you can find it on the net.
You just take the text and Google.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where it's...
You should first of all perhaps use search to get Smolin.
No, that's what I'm saying. I am looking at where I actually quoted him, because I thought I had actually provided the quote. But you see, I made two versions of this, and the other one was...
So you search, you will not get Smolin.
Yeah, but then how will you get, you mean a search, yeah, but then how will you get that particular, there are lots of things about from Smolin on the net, you know, so you'll be looking for hundreds of pages.
No, not net, in this file.
No, in this file, no, I didn't download it, so I would have to go, I have it somewhere at home in a printed version, but I didn't, I just printed it out, so. Anyway, I'll send you the reference.
Question, is there really a golden ratio in the galaxy?
Is there really the...
Golden ratio, does it a golden spiral?
Well, the proportions have been observed, yes, absolutely. The proportions are there. I mean, you can see it in...
Have a reference to that?
Sorry?
You have any reference to that? Because I have heard this story.
Well, here, yeah, you can see.
No, that's true.
Yeah, of course.
But I am not sure that it is really a golden spiral. Because there could be various kinds of spirals.
Yes,
Now, this is a matter of some importance for me because I'm doing a theory of galaxy, of spiral galaxies. So I want to know really what is happening. Is there really a golden spiral?
No.
I have seen a number of texts which are scientific texts that very much, there is in fact an entire book on the golden number in nature. It's a book written, it's called The Golden Number, and it does mention a number of specific data about galaxies. Now, I believe this may not apply to all galaxies, but then it would not. Yeah, but the fact that it's an interesting fact, because if it applies to so many things, why would it apply to certain galaxies and not to others? That would be a very interesting fact.
Suppose there is a barred spiral, what is called the SB8 barred spiral. It will not probably apply to that. Why should it? It's a different structure.
No, in that case. And would it then be a matter of the way in which the galaxy has evolved?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Because would it be that they are born in a particular, according to the golden number rule, and then they evolve into something else? That's another interesting thing, but of course, the examples of the golden number in nature are absolutely...
That is there. Those are there. Those are no problem.
Maybe a small observation that comes from the work of Francisco and Maturana. When as a science, apart from the assumption that science is easy, is not difficult. And the corresponding consideration by Maturana Varela is the following, that what has been ever said has been said by a man, and whatever it has been written has been written by a man. Meaning by that all what we say and write is the product of our own mind, and which also implies that the world is not something that you can take a picture of and describe as an objective thing, but is always an emerging of your inside with the outside, so that there are as many worlds as many observers. And as a science, I begin to believe less and less in the objectivity and more in the importance of the personal subjectivity of the observer, which does not rule out the solidity of science, but put it on a quite different end. And whenever I see something very difficult, I try to sky away and go back to the notion that science must be easy.
Mathematics must surely be easy.
No, I think we all agree on that, and this was one of the things that emerged out of this evolution towards new models that may be simpler and solve some of our apparently intractable problems in physics and in other sciences, where we have gone into such complicated theories that we cannot make sense of them any longer. I think it's time to end this very fruitful and intense day, and I would like His Holiness, of course, to have the last word. I'm sure you all do.
No, nothing. I think wonderful. I think such subject, I think actually we need, I think few days.
Yes.
More sort of question and answer and further sort of, clarification like that. So however, usually within one day, few hours, so I think our discussions or presentation, I think wonderful. Really wonderful. Really wonderful. I think, hopefully, I think the audience, maybe I think less confusion than me. so in any way, you see, so certain things not very clear, then that give us the opportunity to further investigate, further sort of or say they analyze. If things say obvious, then no longer. So I think some mysterious things, still, you see, dilemma, that really provide us the opportunity use human brain maximum way, investigation. So I usually, you see, make clear that sometimes the people, you see, have this sort of because of the impression or kasa, I think understanding, or I think they have the view. Meditation means close your eye and the thoughtlessness. As you mentioned, the thought. So without sort of let kasoda, not let kasoda, thought, right? Thoughtlessness. Sometimes it is useful in order to gain deeper experience of single-pointedness. But I think for this human brain, I think analytical meditation, vipassana, is much more useful, effective.
Yeah.
For practitioner also, you see, the analytical meditation, thinking, the values and shortcomings or advantage. Is analyze, short term, long term, to yourself, to other, even environment. Then you see you get some kind of realistic sort of awareness. That brings conviction. That transforms our destructive emotion. So usually I describe human way of practice is utilize human intelligence maximum way, through that way transform our emotion. So such sort of discussion is really very, very helpful. So hopefully, or not only hope, just I think, as our minor life, from time to time, we sort of have that kind of sort of meeting. So eventually, I think, sometime, I think we should sort of invite you with white dress as an Indian. Kaza, kya kar ho sakta kaza? Kya kar ho jreta India? White Indian. So then eventually, I think the kya nabo.
And also black Chinese.
So I think it should include. Some occasion, you see, some sort of also the scientists from Japan, from China also, some Taiwanese also. So these, we are working for humanity and try to promote knowledge about reality. So wonderful, really wonderful. So I'm looking forward. So more occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think a vote of thanks to the speakers who have come from far away, and despite their busy schedules. Thank you to Samdong Rinpoche, with whose able help and guidance this was possible. Thanks to Your Holiness, and thanks to all those present.